Hello, everyone. Today I'm joined by Gunba, who's here to talk to us a little bit about his new team and his new roster. And I kind of want to start with that because obviously, as an Australian, you're pretty limited in terms of domestic options for coaching. So you've gone abroad. Why did you prioritize this European team over maybe an American team or anywhere else?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's probably a few reasons. One is, I think the big one is like what was the best roster I could easily access and like build upon, and that I had the trust of from the start. And I think SR Peak Check was the obvious starting point for that. I think that team had some players who had like real potential, and the roster had like some inequality in terms of the skill level. I think of the players, nothing horrendous, but um, definitely the kinds of problems that would stop us from winning maybe international events. So I went to Cloudy and I was like, hey, look, we should run this back. We should try and upgrade like the DPS, try and get like a real Lucio player in as well. And yeah, I mean, things went really, really well. We started with, to be honest, we started with Cloud and Seiko on DPS with Sauna, and I was happy with that. And then Marcel, he's come back as well. Out of retirement because of the World Cup, I guess. So you start to like have this roster that comes together really nicely, and then some stuff happened with Falcons that gave us Kevster and Kai, and now we're like, I think realistically the best team in Europe. Um, at least in scrims, obviously it's a bit early to say how that translates long term, but uh, yeah, it just made sense because that was the team that had the best players that I could possibly access at that time. And America, I think, understandably had Toronto, which took away all the Mayhem players, and then after that, what's left? It's a bunch of sort of the kinds of players that maybe were on like Toronto or like Vancouver last year, right? Um, which aren't really players that I've ever worked with, other than Hydron, obviously. So it wasn't exactly the most accessible region at that point.
When you got Kevin Kai then, because obviously, I guess for those people who didn't know, there was originally a super team in the works that was like Kev Kai, who were really, I guess, a package deal this off season. Alongside Smurf and Falcons were going to fund that before initially, obviously, going for the Korean super team. Would you have? Was that just pure opportunistic? Then you were SR Peak Check. You were essentially set and ready to go, and it was just obviously if Kevin Kai become available, then it's a hard duo to say no to.
Yeah, like we had Seiko, who's like really good. He's like one of the best players in Europe. He's like definitely the next guy after Kevster. I think people look at. He was like doing his like military training in Austria. So midway through his training, we're like, hey, sorry, dude, like Kevster's available. Suddenly, we have to take it. So I really feel bad for him, but uh, purely opportunistic. I think really owe Funny Astro a lot. He during the off season he was completely rogue. Like he was talking to every team. He was like on three rosters at once. Um, and then once he left, I think that Falcons super team, they kind of started to look at it and think, oh man, like now what do we do? Who's the Lucio player we can get, kind of thing. And I think he's a big reason why things went the way they did. So really thankful to Funny Astro, I think.
This roster on paper looks very different, particularly compared to your Florida rosters in the past, where you've maybe prioritized younger or less experienced players you felt like you could mold. And this roster kind of only really has that in Ghost 91. Everyone else is about as much of a veteran as you could get. Was this just. Why did you go in this direction instead of maybe your more classic type of roster build?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously watch every Uncoachable podcast and this show as well. Maybe that's because these are really good shows. Maybe because Overwatch content sucks. Maybe somewhere in the middle. But I do
I'll
enjoy
take
it. And yeah, hey, you started at the top, I guess. But I think, to be honest, like I've heard this said a lot that I work with rookies a lot, and like I'm Hitler and all this stuff, and it's just like how's that going to go with veterans? And it's like I think this is a bit black and white. As if veterans are all like this homogenous borg of people that or all have huge egos and hate being told what to do or how to improve their gameplay, and that's not true. Obviously, I mean, I've worked with lots of veterans in season one, obviously, and over the years I've worked with a bunch of them as well, including Kai. I've worked with Kai before, right? This is not like a new thing. So, um, it's definitely a big change in roster. I think even when I talked about building the Florida roster, I talked about the fact that like if we could have had Kevster in our trials, we would have done that.
Yeah.
So for me, I don't know. This doesn't feel like a big difference. I think any player likes to hear about how they can play the game better, and that's true of veteran players, and that's true of rookies as well. So it's not really a big difference at all, as I've noticed. And maybe I'm lucky that the players on this team are super coachable and like really hardworking and really looking to like become a team quickly. And I think that's showed in their results as well. So I'm really optimistic. Yeah, obviously. So, but yeah, I don't think the veteran part of the team is an issue at all.
Okay. Some of the other parts, because I imagine quite a few people have watched your scrims now, either on like Vestler's stream or Haddy's stream or Astro's stream, and you've really played with the same core, which I guess makes a lot of sense on paper, just in terms of there's a lot of players who are best in role. But you've also got Cloudy and Sauna on this roster, so how do they fit into this core? Because obviously, Sauna overlaps quite a lot hero pool wise with Kevster, and Cloudy, obviously, I guess is very much seen as just the Rhine guy.
Yeah, Cloudy's an important member of the team. He runs like the lobbies and stuff and spectates the scrims. No, look, I think Sauna doesn't really have a role at the moment. Just to be completely honest, he knows that it's an issue we're dealing with as well. It's kind of hard to ever justify benching Kev, and playing around the hit scan makes sense when you have a Stoller. So unfortunately, he's kind of on the outs in terms of his play, and I don't really know how to fix that. To be completely frank, hopefully we'll find a solution there that works. But in terms of Cloudy, I mean, not a good patch for Ryan. So he also really doesn't have a role either. But Kai's a big part of the team culture, and he streams a lot of scrims, and he's a big part of like the team in that way as well as like a leader and stuff. And he put the roster together ultimately. I think I've even seen comments suggesting that I should get credit for Ghost, and it's just like no, absolutely not. And Master as well. He's the guy who like brings the team together in that way. He's kind of the glue in a lot of ways. So I don't know what their role is competitively at this point, unless Ryan gets buffed. But yeah, happy to have Cloudy especially, and hopefully we find a way to integrate Sauna at some point, or not. Maybe because if we have to do that, that means the meta's not good for us. So
I guess there's a theoretical world where it becomes like like a Tracer Genji is some of what like Spitfire are playing, or like a Tracer Echo, and that then maybe just sort of find a way, but it's probably seems quite patch dependent.
it would depend on having a main tank patch as well, though, which we would never want realistically, right? So it's a bit of an awkward lineup. Like you don't really want off tanks and Genji Tracer, generally speaking. So
one of the roles you haven't chosen to double up on or have alternative options on was the support role. So you've just got a very classic main support, flex support. But obviously in the old SRP check, we saw you use Gala in a sort of double flex system. Was there ever a temptation to do the same thing here and maybe have a free support backline so you can go between that double flex and maybe give yourself a bit more options? That maybe even enable Kev to play Tracer more often than maybe otherwise.
You were lucky on the current patch with the healing changes. Like Kev can just play Tracer anyway, and people are playing Tracer no matter what.
Yeah.
Lucio, whatever. That being said, we are doing that. To be fair, I mean, Crimzo's on the roster, right? Like Crimzo is someone who can also play. He's a sub. He's coaching, which we can talk about, but we do have the option to put in Crimzo, and he will play actually in some of the matches, I think, because Ghost is absent some of the time, and he lives in like Toronto, so his ping's kind of low to Europe anyway. So putting Crimzo on the roster is going to be a huge help in that respect. And then also just because if you look at our roster, I think the supports have like the least experience in a sense, because like Ghost is obviously a rookie and Master's coming back from retirement. Kind of different sides of the same coin, though. They need feedback, and Crimzo is definitely a big guy for that. So it's not something we considered European wise in terms of like domestic talent, mainly because there is no domestic talent on that role. It's a really weak role in Europe, as you probably know, right? So yeah, we definitely have the option to play double flex. So far to do that though, we've been relying on Master to pick up the zone, which has gone well. I think. I mean, I'm not expecting him to be like the world's best zen or anything, but he's shown like a willingness to learn heroes and be flexible, and that's always something we want to develop to avoid like an Atlanta situation in the playoffs. We want to try and be like a flexible team where possible. I think versus learning Doom, for example. So we are putting in steps to play all these different comps, but of course, we're not going to try and force those comps, right? If we can find ways to, play heroes we're already good at.
Is that because when you look at the roster on paper, it does seem a little bit misaligned? Like you've talked about, like Vestler wants to play the ground heroes, but Kev you really want to Tracer and Genji where you can. Are you prepared that you might have to go down a very unique and craft your own style rather than just having to lean into the meta in a lot of these situations? You might have to craft your own sort of weird or unique comp to solve these problems.
Yeah, I also think I just don't really acknowledge the meta in the first place, to be honest. Like, I don't start from the perspective that there's a meta that we have to then look at and decide, are we playing that or are we not playing that? We just play what we're already good at and what works for us in scrims. That's already been happening. I think we're like one of the only teams playing the way we're playing now, and we have the best results. So, like, in a sense, I think the patch, has kind of, people are kind of coming up with crazy stuff on the patch, and it's like, what have they come up with really? It's like, like Bull Zen comps, And then obviously, everyone pivoted to Moira stuff because that beats the Ball Zen comps, and it's just like people are just reacting all the time and not building anything like sustainable in terms of figuring out which heroes to build around and which heroes to keep in every comp, Tracer. So not worrying about the meta, but not because of that reason, just because it's not something I worry about at all, right? We're just always going to try and play what's good for us, and there are ways to play. To answer your question, there are ways to play Kevster with an off tank, right? Obviously, like Ram Tracer, David Tracer is really good, and then like Zai Genji comps are really good. There are ways to do that, and Vess can actually play ball to a pretty high level, and he's picked up Doom as well. So we have ways to kind of get out of that off tank role if we really want, but haven't needed to do so far.
To go back to the Crimzo pickup into all of this as well, is maybe from the outside seems a little bit odd, maybe a name we don't connect really with the SRP check core or with yourself. How did it come to be at Crimzo? Because I guess in reality you probably could have picked from quite a lot of people or even quite a lot of ex-players to put in this assistant coach role. How did it end up being Crimzo, and what does he really add to the team?
It's because we're building the NA team that I needed a flex support, and we couldn't get UV, we couldn't get Landon or RuPaul, obviously, because they're spoken for as well. So I was like, what do we do? And like I saw Crimzo's retirement tweet, and I was like, man, he's still a good player though. Let's see if we can get him on the team. He agreed to join. The roster at the time, the NA roster had Sparker, Backbone, and then Crimzo. So it was like a sort of NA super team that we're building as well, before they unfortunately went back to Europe. And then with Crimzo, it was like, okay, well, does Crimzo really want to play on this team of rookies, which is now what the NA team is? And so I asked him, like, you want to coach, right? Like, I mean, that's something he said he wanted to do. He announced it. And then I realized that he was really good at that. I realized he was like really useful and had like really good insight about the game. And he's like an 1800 chess player. He's like really, really smart. So it happened naturally. It wasn't something that was like totally planned, but it's been like a really good fit because obviously he can substitute for Ghost, because Ghost is a child, so not always available. Doesn't really have like complete control over his own schedule, and just giving feedback to the supports and macro stuff as well. He's been like super useful.
Okay, I mean, it probably lines up quite nicely as well that your least experienced player is also the player who you've now got in a coaching role with, who has the same role of the most experience there as well.
Especially with the fact that I think Crimzo's best heroes are like Ghost's worst heroes. Having Crimzo to teach someone Ana is huge, right? Like, it's really, really good fit, I think. And the fact that he can play from where he lives, also really big. We don't have any imports on our team, so we have the ability to throw him in whenever. Really, really good fit.
With the change from Overwatch League to OWCS and obviously, I guess, the cutback of funding for every team, traditionally you have this reputation as someone who asks quite a lot of your team, quite a high work rate. Do you feel with now the, I guess, less financial backing for the players and for everyone that you need to then adapt your style to maybe ask less or work a little bit more with people are going to have other stuff going on more than you would in an Overwatch League spot?
Yeah, on like a tangent, I would say it's been really annoying talking to a lot of tier 2 players, like players that maybe, even some of the players that we're now, about like building teams this offseason. This is some advice. I think if you're like a tier 2 player looking for an org, the best way to do that is to find players your level and build a team quickly and get it on Twitter ASAP. And what actually happened, especially in NA, Europe was really easy actually, but in NA, every single player was like, oh, I want to wait and see. I want to consider my options. I want to, and like you had players on like 3 or 4 teams at once, and you had like this kind of crazy roster mania. It's like what you've really done is made it impossible for orgs to jump in and sign your team, right? Like that's what you've really done. It's like committing to things early is valuable, I think. So it's unfortunate that like everyone kind of, every man for himself sort of approach to roster building and made it so difficult to build rosters this offseason. And I think a big part of the other issue is that a lot of players do the opposite, where they want to play with their friends. And this is something I've noticed a lot. I think when you don't have contracts involved, it creates like a mental pressure on these players to like never betray their friends, essentially, to build like these communities where they can keep coming back to the same team. And like you end up with players playing with really bad players that should be on better teams, so really, really unfortunate off season in that sense. And I think especially in NA, there's like a bad culture there for that. And, hopefully people learn from those mistakes. But in terms of your question, I think, like I've had to adapt my style for sure, I think, because, we don't scrim that much. I think we scrim like once a day, rarely twice a day. Master has like work. He's still working 9 to 5. And then Ghost has, he has to go to bed early because he's quite young. So we have like a narrow window of time to scrim, and then we don't really have time for review. So obviously I've had to adapt. But it hasn't been too bad. I've still been able to find like a lot to do. And ways to like obviously making like YouTube videos and stuff for the players instead of doing reviews, stuff, basic stuff like this. Overall, my approach to the game has been completely the same, but I do think about, especially with like the NA team, which doesn't have the same kind of experienced players. I've made like larger rosters, right? That's the change I've made for sure. Like trying to have more than 5 players, because it's normal for someone to say that they have an absence when they're not being paid to play the game. Like it's way more reasonable, It's normal when everyone's remote that they're sometimes not there at scrims and you need like more substitutes. So I've had to change my style in terms of coaching, but also in terms of management. But I mean, I think that's not that hard to do if I'm pragmatic about why I'm having to do that and what kind of changes I should have to make based on what's changed. Like it's not like a random thing or like a feel it out type thing. It's obvious what needs to change without the structure of Al.
For those who don't know as well, you're also working with an American roster as well. Are you able to then sort of cheat a little bit and sort of overlap some of what you learn in one team can be used in the other, or even if you're making videos, some of the videos can actually even apply to both teams at the same time to try and sort of ease the workload?
That's a good question. I'm not giving teams the videos from each other or anything like that. I don't want to like have that conflict of interest where like the players on one team feel like I'm leaking information from that team. Yeah, it feels bad, of course. So I'm not doing that, but yeah, the teams are very similar, and the feedback's very similar in terms of the types of comps they play. I would say the NA team tends to follow the European team more than the other way around, given the experience and like the levels of the teams. Yeah, of course, there's a huge benefit there, and I think one of the reasons I picked up the NA team to kind of work with is like I realized there's a huge patch coming. It was kind of rumored for a long time that they're going to do these changes to the health pools, and the format itself is changing. Obviously, you can ban maps and stuff now, so like practice is going to be very different as a result. And I realized that having 2 teams, especially very early into the patch, would give me a lot more like reps than other coaches. I would see more of the game and get more like chances to see more and more ideas from different regions and stuff like that. So definitely there's an aspect there of like sharing between the teams to reduce the workload. But there's also just a net benefit, I think, that goes on top of that you get from having 2 teams at once, right? Where you can see like twice the information and twice the gameplay, and also just differences between the players. It's not like it's more of like a Venn diagram when you compare 2 players, right? They have some overlap and they have some things that they do better each, right? So being able to see the sort of extra stuff that they're doing better on their own that I can transfer across each player is also valuable as well, I think.
Is that the sort of thing? Because I guess there's obviously like one hypothetical where eventually, if both teams do well enough, you could end up meeting and playing yourself in what will surely be a conflict of interest. Is there like a contingency plan for that hypothetical?
It's hard to call it a contingency plan when the only choice I have is to drop one of the teams at that point, right? So, but there's no like solving that problem, unfortunately. I've already had multiple conversations with like really big tier 1 orgs, like the kinds of orgs that own LCS spots, for example, where like they've been super interested in hiring me, and then like I'm like, but hey, wait, I'm working with this European team. We're probably getting signed or something. Maybe is that okay with you guys? And the answer is almost always no. So I realized that my hope was to have 2 tier 1 orgs at once so that I could like make enough money. I don't really need the money, obviously, but in terms of just getting value out of life, I suppose I could have like two orgs at once. But I wasn't able to do that. So my approach now instead is to have my European team, which I'm very serious about, and give priority, I think, and then kind of like a rookie NA team that's kind of like an upstart mayhem type team, which is secondary in priority, if I'm being honest. And look, if that team makes the major, which is not impossible based on scrim results, if I'm honest, I think getting top 3 of their roster is possible for sure. Listen, they're having a vacation. Okay, like it's fine. They can go to the major, and that's enough, I think. So yeah, I think if it comes down to it, I'll choose the European team. But for as long as possible, I want to help both teams.
Am I right in thinking there's another coach on that North American team as well who sort of, I guess, helps take some of that responsibility and can cover some of the work as well?
Oh yeah, I mean Crimzo obviously as well is on both teams. But SNR is the coach you're referring to. He's also a Canadian coach, so I'm outnumbered on the coaching staff by Canadians. But
the Canadian mafia's coming.
That's right. He was on Amplify with me before this, with Kuffer and Doomed and Cal and Wob and Donghoon. And yeah, I liked working with him. I thought he was like really good, especially for like a tier 2 coach. He was very direct with the players and like unafraid to like say what he thought, kind of thing. So I just brought him along. Yeah, he seems to add value. So happy to work with him. And hey, it's I don't know how to put it, but helping people who maybe haven't had so many opportunities over the past 6 years to get into tier 1, because it is hard to get into tier 1 as a coach. So there's definitely value there. I think it's been good to work with him.
I think even with the sort of tier 1 and tier 2 combining, all that's really happened, I think, for a lot of coaching jobs for up and coming coaches is what all these experienced veteran players kind of are just leaning on coaches they have already worked with in Overwatch League or coaches they already know. So it doesn't actually provide a lot of opportunities, but it's interesting because obviously Chris has done a pretty similar thing with Suji coming in to help him as well. So it's interesting to see this as sort of providing a bit of a platform for, I guess, the first generation of non-Overwatch League coaches coming through.
Well, it's one of the upsides, I think, to the system kind of collapsing. There's not many, I mean, if we're honest about it, but one of the upsides is that we can just bring people onto our team and not pay them and say, hey, you're working with us, that's fine. Hey, you're welcome to be here, whatever. Like Crimzo's not getting paid. I mean, none of us are getting paid, actually, but yeah, different issue. And he wants to learn how to coach, and it's just like suddenly, you can fill up 8 roster spots for free, basically. It's like that's a new situation as well. It's like if people don't cost anything to sign or add to your team, then how you approach coaching and building rosters changes a lot, because there's no budget you're trying to fit things into, right? So yeah, it definitely changes things for sure.
Yeah, no, I think definitely a benefit, and like one of the smaller benefits. As a person then who's essentially probably watched more scrims on this new patch than maybe everyone else, what's the current impression then in terms of, I guess, the big change in terms of a health pool, and maybe the DPS passive is the other, maybe most controversial change as well?
Yeah, firstly, I think most teams don't get it. I'd start there. Like, I think I've seen teams approach this meta in like a really strange one-dimensional way. They're just like, what's the comp that wins us the map right now? It's like, that's not how we should be thinking. We should be trying to find like what are the heroes that are mainstays on the patch. And so see like a Kiri show, which I don't really agree with, and a lot of other comps that are, ball comps. I think ball's really bad. But in terms of the big changes from the patch, I think Trace is out of control. I think the fact that she can't get one shot by Mei anymore, and she also permanently applies the healing debuff from the DPS passive. And any hero like that, like Soldier, any hero that constantly applies the 20% healing debuff every shot, and they're constantly shooting, these heroes are way more impactful, I think, than other heroes. They benefit the most for sure, I think. And then, yeah, I don't know what about the patch made this the case, but Ryan feels really weak. So, like, there's definitely something there that I don't really understand, where, like, I don't know, like, because everyone's, like, so fat and easy to shoot, and, like, damage is a much bigger part of these fights, like, it feels like there's less of a timing element to the game. So heroes that, like, kind of rely on their shield, for example, or some other, like, burst of time, like Queen, I think have suffered a lot. The fact that Soldier can just shoot Queen in the face now all the time, is a huge deal. Like hitbox based heroes, I think, suffered a lot as well, like Genji Kiri. So it's just a very like slow Paladins like game, to put it one way, and it's led to heroes that do more damage and apply the debuff more often being more impactful than heroes that have like utility like Mei and Ryan, which I think is expected. So yeah, nothing too crazy. I mean, there's a patch today, obviously, not to like date the podcast or whatever, but
yeah, there's the hotfix coming today, isn't there? Which I don't think they said it's not going to touch the DPS passive, but it is going to tweak a few other things.
I'm predicting a 0.5 tracer damage nerf and like a nerf to the boop. That's my guess, but shouldn't be too impactful, I think.
Yeah. So do you think where it is now, because it feels like everyone's leaning towards Moira Lucio, obviously you guys started playing some of that in some of your scrims, we've seen Korea actually leaning into quite a bit of Moira Lucio as well. Does that seem to be the future then? And it's like, because it feels like a lot of the flex supports lives right now are just really hard if teams playing these quite aggressive dive comps.
I think Lucio is the meta. I think that's fair to say. I think double flex is much harder now, with like just having a Soldier on off angle can like beam both of the supports every time reliably, for like their whole health pool. So I think double flex support type comps are much worse. I think Lucio is insane. But it's still really good. Like he's not a hero that necessarily has to be visible to provide value, which helps a lot. I'm not sold on Moira in the sense that she is being played right now, but she's being played right now because if you don't play it, every team plays all in Lucios and Ball, Doom, whatever, comps that absolutely kill the flex support player every time. So I think she's being overplayed as a reactionary thing, which is why we're playing her as well. I think for the most part, we're still a BAP team, to be honest. I think like BAP is the safe pick a lot of the time. Lamp's still really good, so mobility is still really good. But at some point, BAP's not feasible. But it feels like for me when comps punish your BAP that hard, they're usually fully committed to that style. So you changing that one flex support to brick their comp seems like a reasonable change.
Okay, some of the other changes, this is now moving a little bit more onto, I guess, OWCS in the future, is the map bans are being introduced for what I think is probably the first time in, maybe not ever, but the first time at least in any reasonable amount of time. What's your early impression of how this might help shape how you practice or how it can help you approach games tactically?
I mean, not to give like too much away, I already dealt with this system in Valorant because I coach Valorant, and that's how Valorant works as well. And like, there's a lot of value there to be gained, I think, and like people underestimate how much strategy there's going to be towards drafting maps. People don't care about that, but it does hugely influence the games. And like, I'm happy to have more avenues for the coach to influence the game for obvious reasons. I'm a bit biased, so but yeah, I think it's going to change the game in a lot of ways. I think it's going to probably. It feels bad to say this, but it's probably going to reduce comp diversity in a way because I think you have to think about, like what's a good hypothetical I can give here? It's like, let's say you're prepping for a team like London, right? And you're us, and London are like a dive team, and we're not a dive team. I know that sounds like counterintuitive, but if you watch Scrims, you'll see what I mean. Obviously, London being a dive team is a bit odd, but for example, they might want Dorado, hypothetically, right? And it's like, okay, you ban Dorado, let's say, right? And then you want Shambhala, you want the rush map, they ban Shambhala. It's like, what's going to happen a lot of the time is with only 4 maps in each game mode, you're going to have the 2 most vanilla maps in the middle being played basically all the time because whatever the differences in the team styles, they're going to ban the extremities, if that makes sense. So I think it might lead to some like negative outcomes that have to be addressed later. In the sense that maybe we'll probably see a lot of the same maps, like the core middle. In this example, we'll see like Rialto and Circuit, maybe, or whatever. Maybe not Circuit, but you understand, right? So it's like I think in a way it'll make a lot of the matches closer in the sense that you're playing maps that are more fair for both teams, but it might also reduce like a lot of the comp diversity because if you do have like a good composition on like Circuit or something, you're never going to get to play it. So I don't know how I feel about it. It's not intrinsically the same as Valorant, I think, in that sense, or CS, where you're kind of playing the same game regardless. And it's just like a stylistic thing, and teams have, teams have like a diverse map pool in that way. It's going to be more targeted, where like teams are way better at certain maps and way worse at other maps, and there's nothing they can do to fix that. Like the hero pools don't align with the map. So it's fun and interesting, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be good.
It's a little bit more complicated as well because like in CS and Valorant, I don't know if it was in Valorant, but in CS it's like a 7 map pool of maps, so it's always very much, and you can take an approach where you just permaban a map just to reduce your practice schedule, whichever's the map you're worst at or whatever. But with Overwatch, because it's divided by mode as well, there's like way more variety in what you can and can't ban, and maybe even in some ways it sort of devalues losers pick a lot. Like on London last year, if we got map 5 losers pick and we could pick Escort, we thought we could win the series every time, right? Because we had such a strong map. But in this new system, no one would ever let us play that map. So we'd sort of be forced to have like a bigger map pool almost in a way.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, there's also a variance problem where like a strategy in Valorant that was common and like I exploited a lot was like sometimes you can get them to ban your map, right? Which I think people are going to realize. I think coaches in this game are a bit smarter, so I'm not going to like try and hide that. But if you get them to ban the map you want to ban anyway, you effectively get like 2 bans. But I think in that sense, like little mistakes like that in the drafting are going to have a way bigger impact when the bans take out 50% of the pool and just 2 bans, right? Like these decisions are so impactful, even though they're like small decisions. And also there's like an inequality in terms of the drafting system where like the first team to ban also gets to pick. So it's like ban, the other team bans, and then you pick. So like in a sense, the first team that bans gets 2 bans out of a 4 map pool. And that does flip across the game modes, but because it's like a first to 2 or whatever, like the team A in this example gets to do a ban advantage twice out of 3, 3 sets of bans or whatever, 3 sets of drafts. So I don't know. It does seem like a system that's going to heavily impact the game and like heavily skew results and also kind of reduce diversity. I wonder if it's actually a good system, but it's really interesting. It'd be a different story if like all the game modes were pickable at each stage of the match, rather than like, or something like that. Or like if there was like hero bans, maybe with some kind of limitations on how often you can ban certain heroes. I do think there needs to be ways to shake up the game. I do think there needs to be ways to like allow teams to have some agency in how they play the game and like not get like London last year, not get punished every time they get pulled to like a bad map for them. I think that creates like a bad viewership experience watching London get like slammed on Dorado or something. It's just like, what's the point of that? Like who wants to watch that garbage? So um, I think there's more work to be done there. I think like their heart's in the right place. So I wonder about the actual solutions they put in place, though, to be honest.
Yeah, I think there's probably an argument that a system where there's just like a smaller map pool overall, but every time you can just pick any of the maps, whether it's Flashpoint, Hybrid, Koth, or whatever it is, could be more interesting. But I guess overall, it probably feels like a good thing that we're trying new things to add diversity, and then I imagine these are the sort of things that can change between the first tournament, the second tournament, the major, and all of that.
Well, yeah, it's also worth mentioning, like, 'cause I do think some people are going to see this system and maybe it'll have some negative outcomes, and we'll say, why did we do that? We shouldn't have done anything. It's like, if you've been watching, OWCS Korea, right? They're already playing the same comp every map. It's already happening. Like they're literally already doing the same thing. They're all copying each other. They're all playing Junker Queen Moira, and then the team with Shu and Chorong started playing, the Doom Echo, whatever, with Lucio Kiri, and everyone's playing that. And it's like, this is more of a problem in Korea for some reason. They tend to copy each other more, but we're already seeing that this is going to be a huge problem, and this is going to be a huge problem, especially without the resources of the Overwatch League to like enable teams to have 3 scrims a day and lots of reviews and like really develop like complex strategy and preset map pools. Overwatch had that. People might not know that Overwatch League had that, but you would know exactly which maps you were playing like a month in advance, even sometimes more, against each opponent. And like a lot of the strategies that we came up with were because of that, because we knew we're playing like, for example, Boston on like Numbani in like a month. We knew like what they wanted to play. We knew what we want to play. Even like the comp that we won the Overwatch League on, Sigma Bastion, was created specifically to beat Boston on Numbani, right? Like that's something that came from that system. And now, like there's less incentive for that because you don't know what they're going to ban. Like you're kind of pressured to not have any like really specific maps that you feel are really good for you because they'll just ban it. And it's hard to hide that in practice. So, yeah, I am worried. But I don't know that like no system is a solution either. I do think there needs to be something. It's just not simple to figure out what that is, I think.
Yeah. To move on to then, I guess, expectations. You've already alluded to the idea that you guys are the best team in Europe. Maybe before we get into the weeds with that, I think Chris said that he really thinks EU is going to be the most competitive region out of the 3 regions. Would you agree with that statement? Do you think it's the most balanced, the most deep in talent, at least?
Yeah, it's hard to evaluate like where EU and NA stand objectively and say, okay, like, it feels like there's more competitive teams in Europe, but that can also be indicative of weaker overall teams, right? If it's, you muddy the waters a bit there. It's like, I think in Europe, you have Twisted Minds, Rock Esports, and Saudi, and then you have us in London, obviously, and you have EXO, right? So there's at least like 5 teams here. I feel like I'm forgetting an entire team. Like Peps, Peps is actually pretty good.
Peps, and then there's the One Trick team as well, and that could maybe like really ruin some people's days. Maybe. Yeah.
We have less problems with them, I think, generally, because we know how to beat some of the stuff they're doing. But yeah, like there's like at least 6 teams in Europe. Might be like 1 or 2 more at the end, and like that's pretty good at this point, realistically, right? I think NA has like 3 teams, maybe 4 with Wisp. Yeah, maybe. I think Europe's probably more competitive if I really think it through. But I also think, to be fair, though, we're going to see Europe and NA as like one region at some point, because I've already been organizing it so that European teams and NA teams have an overlapping scrim schedule. Because basically what we did is we asked the NA teams to start their scrims earlier. So like 4 to 6 EST, so that they could then scrim European teams, right, as our last block and like their first block, if that makes sense. Because we realized that I think one thing we can definitely agree on is that Korea is more competitive, right? Like I think Korea has way more good teams like than Europe and NA, maybe even combined. So I think fusing our regions more is probably more of a thing that we need to be doing, and we are doing that. That is in process. So hopefully we get to stream those scrims, and you get to see SR Peak Check or whatever the fuck we're called versus Toronto, for example. So hopefully it's not that black and white. And hopefully we do get to have some of that international competition before the major. But yeah, I don't know. Europe is definitely. I would say Europe is better than NA right now. But I mean, London are not helping by scrimming Wisp on 140 ping and losing. If they could not do that, that'd be good.
Well, I think it's something when I've spoke to a lot of the other teams as well, everyone is quite keen that they were very keen to overlap the regions just to get that maximum scrim quality. Like if you look at Korea and it's like we can actually scrim one of like 7 or 8 teams, and you're gonna have it's very easy to fill an entire week of pretty good scrims from sort of top to bottom, which is maybe a little bit harder, and as maybe especially in America when you deal with some of the collegiate teams, especially having like more messed up or more inconsistent schedules. So I think the idea of combining the regions, so it's a just if you get to play better teams more often, you'll get better faster.
Yeah, it's a requirement. Actually, I forgot. I remember in my head there was like a European team I couldn't name. I was like, hold on, like what? It's Redbirds. Redbirds is going to play in Europe this season probably. So, we're
Oh,
gonna have
okay, on
another.
ping.
Yeah, but yeah, well, I mean,
Oh,
only
okay.
like 90 ms, right? It's not that bad. That's why Scrim is even possible across regions. So, Europe's taking one of theirs, which is nice. Always good to see that. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, it should be fine. I feel like if we combine Europe and the net, it should be like enough practice to beat Korean teams, especially if we have like our own style. But they are a little scary. I'll be honest. Yeah.
So where would you rank then? You think yourselves at the top of the European pile. Obviously, I don't think Toronto have started playing yet because they're waiting for their Koreans. But where do you think you'll match up in that sort of head to head?
This is going to sound absolutely fucking delusional. I think we'll beat Toronto. Like, I really think that. I don't know. My feeling is, and again, this is like, you can put this in the YouTube title. I'm sure you need the title, right? But I don't know. I'm really confident in my ability to find ways to win games, and I think maybe there was like some worry there about I haven't worked with some of these players before. Like, what kind of personalities do they have? And they've been great. Honestly, our players are really good and they're really hardworking and like they're easy to work with. They learn things quickly. We've already picked up a lot of the ideas that Mayhem had and started like building on those. And um, we're kind of just getting the whole idea of how to play the game across really quickly. So the team's improving like every day. Like it's very noticeable. I think you even saw it with our scrims. Like we started off 3-3 against EXO. Not even like the current new EXO roster, like the weaker one from before. We started off 3-3 against them. Like middle of the pack garbage, right? Then we like played London and like we struggled against London. We even lost like a couple of scrims against London. And I mean, in the past like 3 EXO scrims, I think we're like 21-1. London, we went from like 5-2 to 5-1 yesterday. And even that map that we lost was a joke. Like we were playing Vestola on Ryan. I don't know. It's been like a really, really good transformation really quickly. So I'm super optimistic. I really am.
What is the internal structure? Because when I look at the roster and I sort of think of Kevin Kai maybe as quite quiet players, who is the sort of leadership? I guess like the in-game cooler in that situation for you guys.
Yeah, we have a quiet team on paper, right? I think that's fair to say. I would say it's split between Vess, Master, and Kev. Actually, I think
Okay.
Kev is probably making a lot of the hard calls in game. I would say, like straight up. Obviously, Vess is doing a lot of that as well. He's a tank, so he kind of has to lead as well. And Master adds like a lot of value in terms of like obviously ult tracking, but also like calling opportunities mid fight. It's something we're being very deliberate about, and like we understand as an issue, and like I think we're already well on our way to solving that. And like we've seen that in game. But, like our team plays super fast and super fast to react to opportunities in the game, and there's no hesitation, and everyone's on the same page all the time. So I was really worried about that actually with Europeans because Europeans just don't talk to the same extent, especially Koreans do, but even Americans, do as well. So yeah, people have really stepped up, I think, and like especially Kev is the one that surprised me. I mean, Bastola and Master talking a lot. I think that makes sense. They're in roles that should do that, and they do their job. But Kev's really picked up the comms a lot, and I think that deserves notice.
I guess the big sort of end goal for any team in Europe or North America has to be to sort of look at that Falcons roster and try and figure out, is it beatable, is it winnable? So how do you feel? You're very confident in Europe, very confident against Toronto, but obviously this Falcons team, I think most people kind of referring to it as maybe the best team ever made on paper. Is it beatable then, or are they just out of reach? They're that good.
Depends how much the organization makes them play Marged, right? I mean, that's definitely a question mark, I think. So hopefully he's in. But yeah, I mean, definitely on paper, that's the best roster ever assembled. But things aren't always simple. I think, personally, I actually think this is a hot take. I think I don't know what the fuck the teams are called in Korea, by the way. The team with Max, Junbin, Churong,
Is
Shu,
it
that team.
WAC or something? Yeah.
That's what. Yeah, 100%. I think Moon's coaching them, like
Yeah, Moon is,
the
yeah.
Overwatch League coach, and like Kong and people like that, good coaches. So I think that team might be the better team in the end, just because they're a more functional unit of players. Like they have more like potential to grow. They have like a better support line, in my opinion. To be not even in my, I think factually they have a better support line. are way less toxic players. I think that team has like way more potential to be like a really good team and grow and like deal with their problems and play the game in like the way an Overwatch League team would, where they iterate every day and kind of improve. And I think we've already seen that. They're the team that came up with the Doom comp everyone's playing. It wasn't Falcons leading the way at all, right? Falcons are kind of following in that sense. So, but that doesn't really answer your question because that's just another Korean team that we're going to lose to, right? So, to be honest, like, yeah, I'm definitely worried about teams like this. I don't know how we're supposed to beat these teams. I think my big hope is that, firstly, they'll have a bit more jet lag than us going to the tournaments. Like the tournaments are much closer to Europe overall. Like Dallas is pretty close, and then obviously, Riyadh and Stockholm are kind of very short flights, right? So maybe we'll have some advantage there in that sense. But really, I think we're just gonna have to hope that the meta shakes out in our favor, or that they're not ready for the kinds of things we're doing, which is going to be difficult when you consider that we stream a lot of scrims. To be honest, like that is something I'm worried about. I really like the streaming scrims thing. I think it's like super good for the region. Even though London didn't stream their scrims, by the way, when we played them, they really wanted to beat us one time, and it was like 2 scrims ago, and they cut all the streams and like hid their comps before every map, and that's so lame, I think, because they're the ones that said that everyone should stream. So fuck you, Chris. But I don't know. I don't see a real easy solution to the fact that we're like streaming every scrim, and then we're going to play Korean teams who are not streaming any of their scrims, right? I think the silver lining is there's only 2 of them, right? They didn't get 2 slots out of Korea, thank God, because they probably deserve like twice that many. And look, worst case scenario, we'll just cheat. Like we'll just collude, because the advantage is they're all coming to Europe, so they're going to scrim us, but they're also going to scrim other European teams, and we'll just get their VODs leaked. So I think we'll be fine.
Back alleyways to take them down, kneecap them when they're not
whatever
looking.
It takes.
So I think that kind of answers all of my questions. I think it's certainly an exciting time. I guess maybe on the streaming scrims bit to finish. Obviously, you've done it before in the past as well, because right now there seems to be, at least when we're recording, there's a wave of no-com streams, which I guess you guys did quite early on, really. By having either Cloudy stream them or even like their stream with no comms. Do you think that's then the sort of future middle ground? Because obviously the gameplay's still on show, but obviously you're hiding like your sort of planning structure and your ideas, and you're thinking about the game a little more.
I think people are desperate for content, because I know Cloudy was streaming literally just his face. Before we even announced the roster, his face on stream, 400 people, muted, just his face. Like him reacting to the scrims, and like you can see the reflection of the scrim on his TV.
Like in his eyes, zoomed in.
Yeah. So like people are desperate for it, at some level. I mean, not that many people, but quite a lot of people considering, I think. But in terms of the future, I don't know, like we stopped streaming comms because people on our team kind of felt self-conscious about it or something. I don't know. It wasn't really for like strategic reasons, but yeah, other teams have done that as well. Happy that we're allowed to stream it all. Obviously, it's ideal when Cloudy streams and he's watching the overhead. That's like quite nice, because it's like a co-stream, right? It's not something that like adversely impacts one team over the other, because you're not even hearing like one player talk, for example. So yeah, no com streams make a lot of sense for that reason. They're kind of asynchronous in the sense that everyone gets the same kind of benefit from the scrim. But to be completely frank, I think it would be nice to have comms and have teams stream their comms and have everyone be able to listen to all the strategy. And like we did do that for a while. Like you could probably hear me if you go back on the VODs quite a bit, and like the way I think. So that's definitely there. But at the same time, like I'm absolutely the kind of person who would ruin that. Like I'm absolutely the kind of person who, after scrimming London, I would go and watch everything London said and listen to everything they said. And yeah, I would ruin that, I think, in a way. So I think it makes sense that this is the middle ground. Hopefully we don't let that progress further. I do think teams will stop streaming scrims closer to the big events, because the Korean teams will obviously watch our VODs. We can't do that to them. So that's probably going to happen, unfortunately. I'm sad about that. I don't think Koreans will ever stream, especially considering they can't do VODs on Twitch. Like Twitch doesn't really work for Koreans, so like the platform and the monetization is not there for them anyway. And it's not something they really care about anyway. So yeah, I do think it'll stop, but I'm happy with the middle ground that we found. I think it's good.
Yeah, I think it provides is pretty neutral, and in reality, even if you didn't stream the scrims, at least from a competitive standpoint, as we experienced in Overwatch League, your comps or what you're doing, it'll get out anyway, whether you want it to or not, whether you stream them or not. So I don't think there's like a huge gap. I mean, maybe there's like an accessibility gap where you make it easy for them, but if it's going to happen anyway, it doesn't. I don't think you lose massively.
This is like one of the things that I think people don't realize about Al. I think they've kind of learned now through maybe the Uncoachable podcast or whatever, but when you enter a match against any team, you had all of their comps. You had like literally a list of everything they're going to play on every map within the past 1 or 2 days of scrims. Every single comp always was known before every match, and that's like one of the reasons why I think Overwatch League had so few comps. I mean, it's not going to be different now; it's going to be the same, right? In Tier 2, this has been a thing as well. So I think one of the reasons there's not as much like strategy in this game is because of that problem where everything's always known, and that's going to be true regardless of the streams. People literally link replay codes to each other. Like I tried to get Blizzard to fix this like 2 years ago. I was like, you should probably check which accounts have access to which replay codes, because in theory they would know because of the
it'd be
account IDs.
It'd be really easy to figure it out. Like it doesn't take
my idea was Florida 001, and if I'm watching a video from Washington 007, there's a problem. Like if I'm watching their codes, it's a big deal. But they just didn't have any interest in doing that, and maybe they're right to not do that. Maybe it's just a waste of time. Maybe like people just link the VODs instead, or type out the comps or whatever. So, but yeah, if you wonder why there's such little strategy in Overwatch League, that's probably one of the big reasons. It's really punishing to be like a team that relies on like one-off ideas.
Did this happen in Valorant, where you would then try and do the same thing? Because I guess especially in Valorant, it's a lot more set up and execute based as well. So getting that information would actually be a huge advantage.
Yeah, Valorant was interesting because one big issue was that players on Valorant teams didn't even want coaches in the lobby. Like you couldn't even watch your own players' POVs. You had to use like a Discord stream. It's one of the reasons I stopped coaching it. It was fucking boring to watch like one player's POV all the time and have like such a minimal impact on the game. So yeah, Valorant players were really careful about that. That being said, though, in Valorant, there was this tool that let you like generate like heat maps. It's still probably around. People probably still use it. You could generate like heat maps and like all sorts of like quantitative data about like how a team gets their wins, when this player gets a pick, what's their chance to win, and like how often does this player play this bomb site, and which heroes do they play where, and all this stuff. And you could basically just like download their defaults through this tool, right? And we also used it to get information about matches that weren't even streamed because it was through an API. So like if there was a match not even streamed, a lot of these teams didn't even realize this, that like if they showed a strat off stream in a match, even like an open qualifier, you could download that and then you could basically beat them with knowledge that they didn't even know you had. And we did that, we took advantage of that, of course. So Valorant has like a completely different paradigm in a lot of ways. A bit of both, I think.
Okay. All right. No, thanks very much. It's been interesting, and I'm sure we'll see a lot more of Overwatch League spray check in scrims, and we'll see you in OWCS when it kicks off in, a couple of weeks out?
Yeah, okay, thank you.
All right, thank you very much.